What if we can positively impact society by reshaping the mindsets of young men? And while we're at it, let me ask you, what does it mean to be a man? My name is Dennis Meralda, a father, a teacher, a coach, a mentor, and a principal with over 2 decades of experience shaping the minds and characters of young men across the United States. If these questions resonate, if you're a young man looking to improve your life or a parent looking for tools to help your son become the best version of himself, the Building Men podcast was created for you. What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Building Men podcast, or welcome back. If you have been here before, as always, I'm your host, Dennis Meralda, teacher, father, partner, mentor, creator of Building Men, and honored to have a return guest on our podcast. His name is David Waldy. You can go all the way back to July 21st of 2022. Listen to that last episode. There was so much positive feedback that I received from people getting value from that conversation. So definitely go back and check out that episode. David Waldy is the Fierce Empathy Coach, and I labeled that episode as Fierce Empathy with David Waldy, so it wasn't very creative there. But as the founder of Fierce Empathy and the Ardent Man, David, and we'll get into the Ardent Man during the episode, David serves as an integrative small business consultant. He's a personal coach to high-performing men. He's a keynote speaker. We'll get into that as well. He provides strategies, solutions, and support for owners and leaders who want to calm the chaos and reclaim control and intentionally cultivate lives filled with greater peace, purpose, passion, and profit, all without sacrificing their family, their health, or their well-being. And I will give my personal endorsement. David has helped me with all of those things in the last 2 years. So speaking from my own experience, my man, good to see you again. What's up, David?
Dennis Meralda, what's up, my man? It's so good to be here. I'm excited for today's convo.
Oh, as always. And in the last 2 years, man, since we connected on the podcast, that was the first time that we had communicated. And after that, you and I had spoke once every 3 or 4 weeks. I was struggling not only with my mental health, with growing my business, with some imposter syndrome. And you were there for me you would always sign off with like with you and for you. Whenever we were texting back and forth, you talked me off the ledge a couple of times. So as I was growing Building Men, you were there for me, man. So heartfelt thank you. I really, really appreciate all the stuff that you did for me, the connections that you introduced me to, but just being there from afar as I went through what I went through. You were like an angel, dude. I really, really mean that.
Man, Dennis, I'm honored, brother. And I know that everyone listening here knows the value that you bring. And uh, I think the biggest thing for me is nothing brings me more fulfillment and joy than seeing good men and good women thrive with their mission and their vision and to actually stay committed to the process. And so I want you to know that I've been inspired by your journey. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. It's an inspiration to me. It's a kick in the pants to me too. To be like, all right, Waldy, you're supporting other people. Let's talk about your stuff too. And so, man, I'm so grateful to just kind of get to be a small part of this incredible story that you're creating, brother, and the impact that you're making.
Thank you, man. And maybe when we produce this, we could put some soft romantic music in the background there, because that was a lot of bro love that just transpired there in the very beginning of this episode. So catch us up on life since the last time you were on the podcast. I know that's a very loaded question. There's a million things going on, but since and in the last 2 years, what's been going on in your life? Good, bad, ugly.
Man, so many different things. Right now, my wife and I were pregnant with our fourth, and so super excited. We're welcoming him a little baby in October. We actually found out today the gender, but as I told Dennis before the show, wife said, "Hey, I want to keep this private for a little bit, so can't share it with everybody. But I'm sure by the time this comes out, you'll see it on my social media or something." But we're super excited about that. And the last 2 years, man, has been a new evolution just for myself. A lot of different growth, a lot of expansion, a lot of challenges, a lot of pain. And I think that that's one of the things that I'm learning more and more is that we've heard the term for every new level, there's a new devil, right? Mm-hmm. And that's been the case. There's been times where it's felt completely hopeless. There's been times where there's been just crippling fear. There's been times of complete and total ecstatic joy and just extremely beautiful experiences and everything from health stuff. Last year had some major health complications with my back, and I ended up having to go through a process. It was actually on, actually, I can't even remember now. No, this wasn't a year ago. This was 6 months ago. Sorry, 6 months ago. And it was New Year's Eve. My back completely gave out on me, and I crumpled to the floor, and I couldn't walk for 3 days. I could barely get out of bed. It was the worst pain I've ever felt in my entire life. And I'm still dealing with some of those things. I've got degenerative disc issues and a herniation as well. And then I've got some major hip problems. So I've been doing some alternative therapy things that have definitely been helping improve. But other than that, man, marriage has been beautiful. My wife and I, we celebrated 10 years in April. So a decade of marriage, which is amazing. My kids are all healthy, beautiful little babies, and they're just growing like weeds. But business has been incredible. I've had some really unique opportunities to work with some really cool brands, some incredible companies all around the world, actually, which has been wild. And just learning a lot, and learning a lot about myself, learning a lot about how you may feel like you've developed expertise in a different area, or you've gotten really good at a sport, or for those listening, you probably are in a season of life where you're trying to figure out, how do I get really good at this thing? Is that you might become the best, and then when you become the best at a certain level, it's kind of like you're the best in middle school, and then you get to high school, and then from high school you go to college, and then college and beyond. Is that there's new levels. And what's beautiful is that it's an opportunity to get curious again. It's an opportunity for humility. It's an opportunity to check your ego and your pride, and to realize that there's always things for us to learn. And when you walk with this, what I like to call this curious, empathetic, just humble approach to life, is that we put so much pressure on ourselves to have it all figured out, that oftentimes we're missing the journey along the way. We're missing those life lessons because we're just trying to get to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And you and I were talking about that before, Dennis. We both have daughters that are highly driven,
Yeah.
and I find myself, I can get swept up into that as I'm trying to work so hard to get to that next thing, that sometimes I forget to really enjoy life in the process. And so this really, the last 2 years have been a lot of slowing down, a lot of intentionality, a lot of really being careful with my boundaries and my schedule, and making sure that I'm prioritizing my health and myself in the right ways, and then prioritizing my family, and then making sure that when I go out into the public and I'm serving clients or I'm speaking or whatever it is, then I'm able to pour from a cup that's overflowing, instead of really what many of us do is we give the last few drops pouring out of an empty cup.
To learn more about our programs, including one-on-one mentorship coaching, the Foundation, our Building Men online group community for young men, or to bring a Building Men experience to your school, check out our website, buildingmen.io, or click the links in the bio. Now, back to the show. And I will speak from my experience. As the listeners of the podcast know, we do that Sunday group called the Foundation. So it meets every 2 weeks, and I invite mentors on. And I asked you to come on, like, hey, do you want to come on and be a guest on the Foundation? But here's what I'm getting at, is that your Sundays are sacred time. Yeah. And you said, listen, man, like, I love what you're doing. I think this is awesome. I'm here to support in any way, shape, or form. If you were doing this on Monday through Saturday, I'm all in. But you said Sundays are my time with my family. So unfortunately, I can't commit to that. And I said, I respect that more than if somebody was like, yeah, our Sundays are family time, but I can do that. I'll make an exception for you. So I fully appreciate you saying that. That is sacred time with your family. You don't get those times back. And I also like you saying, the process of figuring it out. The older you get, the more that you realize the figuring out part of life is life, right? That's the good stuff. I always thought and I had the conversation with my son. He's back from school right now. And I said, I remember, I couldn't wait to get into high school, because in high school, X, Y, and Z happened. And then I couldn't wait to graduate and start college. And in college, I was like, I couldn't wait to do this. And I can't wait to graduate. And you realize you're missing out on life when you're just looking for the next thing. And you have to go through those bumps and bruises, those trials and tribulations along the way. So my question, I segue back into you saying, and congratulations on the 10-year anniversary. It's a lot of work that goes into a marriage with children. I totally understand that. One thing when I meet with kids in Building Men groups, they're always asking for advice on relationships. Inevitably, once I've established community and trust with the boys, they bring up situations that are occurring with them and someone that they want to be romantically involved with, that they are romantically involved with, and they're asking for like, what do I do in this situation, or how do I handle that situation?
Yeah.
And we never really learned that as we're growing up. We have to make the mistake, and then we learn from making the mistake. There was no one, for me especially, there was no one that taught me how to be in a relationship, so I made every mistake in the book. So if you're talking to a group of young men right now and they're like, give us some relationship advice, as you know, a 10-year vet in this game here, what advice would you give to a young man?
So that's a great question. And I think it depends on the context. If we're talking about romantic relationships and you're talking about getting involved with, in that scenario, I think one of the biggest things that you've got to remember is that you're going to make choices that are going to affect you for the rest of your life in this season. And whether you recognize it or not, they're going to affect you for the rest of your life. I think, especially if you're getting sexually involved with
Mm-hmm.
someone, it is something that may feel innocent. Obviously, we all know like it's going to feel good for a moment, but there are implications, there are consequences. And I think sometimes we have a negative view of the term consequences. Consequences in and of themselves aren't intrinsically good or bad. They're just the results that are created by our actions. And so we see a lot of this in, men in their 20s and their 30s, where there were choices and decisions made between the ages of, 14 to, the early 20s, where you're just not thinking about the long term. You're just thinking about the moment, and you're just thinking about, okay, I want to feel good. I want to feel connected. I want to feel seen. I want to feel loved. And what I would encourage any young man who's listening to this, and parents as well, to reinforce this, is that the most important thing for you in this entire expansive thing that we call life is to focus more on learning about yourself than learning about how to do relationships well. And what I mean by that, because it can be very confusing, what I mean by that is that if you understand yourself and your tendencies, and you take time to establish your core values and your virtues and the things that are the standards that you are okay with and that you're not okay with, these are things that most young men, they don't do. They're just looking for, okay, does she have a nice rack? Does she have the booty? Does she have the
Mm-hmm.
like the looks? Does she fit the mold of what, like, am I going to be proud to have her on my shoulder, or whatever it is, right? And I get that. I understand that most men were visual creatures, but in this season of life, you have to recognize that those are things that are going to fade. That most of what is what we perceive to be attractive, when it's just visual, those are things that are going to disappear. Those are things that are going to fade. And so what you want to recognize is the law of attraction and magnetism. What that means is that if you focus more on defining who you want to be as a man, again, your values, what do you value? Right? Because we live in a world where there's a lot of conflicting values. You have a lot of people that talk about, well, the way to happiness is to make a lot of money, or the
Mm-hmm.
way to happiness is to have a lot of sex, or the way to happiness is whatever it is, right? And we see this all over social media. But the problem is that we forget that establishing our core values, like for me, family is one of those things. And you just talked about it, is that family non-negotiable. I love people. I love being around people. I'm a social butterfly.
Yep.
Like, I like hanging out, but I understand that most people on this planet are so hyper concerned with the things going on in the world and advocating for and fighting against and social justice and all these things, which are important, that they neglect the dining room table. They neglect the neighbor that's next door. And they're trying to have this massive global impact. And even when we're younger, we're trying to matter. Like, that's what happens. We all want to matter. We want to feel like we matter, not only in relationships, but if you're not taking the time to establish, okay, what do I value and who am I? And what I'd say is one of the most underrated skills is develop your emotional intelligence. Learn to identify and understand why you're feeling what you're feeling. When you're feeling anger, learn to stop and identify why you're angry. When you're feeling sad, when you're feeling frustrated, when you're feeling overwhelmed, start to learn how to identify and label the emotions that you're feeling. Because if you can focus on these things, who you want to be, who you want to become, your virtues, your values, and developing a skill set around your emotional state, you will magnetize different types of people into your life. And that's where I think young men oftentimes get mistaken, is that they're all outside focused What do I need to do to put on the show or wear
Hmm.
the right clothes, have the right sneakers, the right whatever it is, the right combination of things to get her to notice me. When really, if you would focus more on building yourself to be the best version of yourself, you will find that you will attract the type of people, particularly a romantic partner, who you is just drawn to you because you're going to find someone that is in alignment with the things that you're in alignment with. And I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, Dennis, but I think that if I could go back to when I was a teenager or when I was in my early 20s, that was something that no one taught me, is that focus more on who you want to become and your disciplines, your habits, whether or not you're snoozing, how lazy are you actually putting in work, are you actually developing your skills, are you actually finding mentors, are you actually trying to learn from people that are a few chapters ahead of you, or are you just completely absorbed in the satisfaction of the moment? I want this because it feels good. And that's where you can create a lot of unintended consequences, not to scare people, but it's very
Hmm.
real. And those are things that you will carry with you for the rest of your life. And a lot of times we don't count the cost.
Yeah, powerful stuff right there. And things that I wish that I learned when I was in that middle school, high school age range. I didn't have that mentor that was teaching me those things. And unfortunately, life is going to teach you the lessons until you learn them, right? And so I got hit in the
Well,
face with a lot of those lessons. To me, when if I was asking that question to a mentor of some sort when I was that age range, and what relationship advice would you give to me? As a 15-year-old, I was like, all right, how do I take off a bra strap with one hand? Like, how does that account? Is that possible? Is that, I've heard some tales that you can do it. How can I possibly do that? Your advice is way better. It'll serve you way better in the future. You mentioned being intentional around the dining room table. So let's jump into fatherhood.
yeah.
You have Emmy is 6, Bear is 4, Leo is 2 as we're recording this episode. Mystery baby is still in utero right now. But when you're thinking about being intentional, and one thing that I love about you is your intentionality, not only as the man you are, as the coach you are, as the father you are, but in every single interaction, you're very, very intentional. And I'm sure it's you and your wife are having conversations about things that you want to make sure that you are teaching your children along the journey. So it could be, this is something that we're going to bring to them when when they're able to walk, when they're able to have conversations, when their prefrontal cortex is developing in a way where they can start to understand empathy, when they can start to understand being other centered. So right now in your world,
Yeah.
as a dad, what are the lessons that you're being really intentional in teaching your kids?
I think one of the biggest things is the difference between shame and guilt. And I think that this is so critically important for parents, just for human beings, because we live in a world where I would say that the overwhelming majority of, and I can't speak for the world population, but I'd say for in the United States of America, you meet the average person, and they are completely and totally crippled by shame. They are living in shame for their past, for the things, the mistakes that they've made, for all these things. And the reason is because of how we address these things, I think, as parents, how we confront problem behavior, how we deal with discipline, and even how we speak to ourselves. And when we're saying things, we're not consciously aware of how we're communicating. And so a simple example of this is that one of the things that my wife have been very intentional to work on is that when our kids' behavior is not appropriate behavior, right? The way that they should be acting, instead of saying something like you're a bad kid,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is very easy to say. It's like, I can't stand you're being a, whatever it is, right? Whatever language we use, is that instead of attacking their identity, we're attacking the behavior, we're attacking the action, we're addressing what was done instead of who they are at their core. And so instead of saying like, you're a mean person, that was a mean thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I've been really working with my kids on is that I'll address the behavior, when something happens, so say like my 2-year old, he he rips a toy from the 4-year old, and then they get into it and they start punching each other or whatever, right? And they're both screaming and crying, and I'll separate them, and the 2-year old doesn't understand this yet, but I can look at my 4-year old and I can have a conversation with him. And I'm like, buddy, was that something that was kind? And he's like, no, that wasn't kind. I'm like, that was a very mean thing, wasn't it? And he's like, yes, it was a mean thing. And I'm like, but you're not a mean person, are you? And so it's trying to reinforce the positive
Mm-hmm.
identity of saying, like, this is not who you are. This is not who you are, but the behavior is not okay. And so I think for us as a society, especially when it comes to our self talk, we say things, and parents, this is especially important for you to be very, very conscious of your self talk around your kids and how you talk to yourself. So if you're constantly saying things like, I'm an idiot,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm a failure, or I'm stupid, or what, like I'm trying to be gentle with the language. We use flowery language. We we do as parents, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes we say it to ourselves, and even if it's not explicit or out loud, we're saying these things in our head. And Dennis, there was a time where I was actually building this office, and I'll never forget the day I was intentionally working on my self-talk. And this is where this whole entire desire to help people that are just stuck in shame came out of, is that I the majority of my life, no matter how much I achieved, right? Because then we talked about this, I think, in the last episode. By my mid 20s, I had achieved the American dream: glass corner office, company car, 6-figure salary, married, kid,
Mm-hmm.
like had it all. And I ended up, again, I believe we talked about this in the last episode. I ended up coming to the darkest place of my life, ready to end my life. And it was following that experience, and you can go back and listen to that. It was following that experience that I had to go through this very intentional process of starting to really, really assess and become aware of my patterns and my behaviors and my default programming and the things that I was just doing without thinking. And I was in this office, and there was a day where I was nailing something up. I was nailing up, like, I don't know if there will be video for this, but I have these wood panels in my office. And when I was using a nail gun, I used the nail gun and I dropped it. If you've ever used a nail gun before, you know those things aren't light, right? And it fell down, and I just jerked my foot out of the way just in time before it would have crushed my toe. And the words that came out of my mouth were, David, that was a really stupid thing to do. And in that moment, something clicked for me, Dennis, because we all know this in personal growth and personal development. A lot of the work that you do internally, you're not going to see the result for 3, 6, 12 months down the line until you get tested. That's the
Mm-hmm.
hard thing.
Right.
Until you get tested again, you won't see that deep work has created results. And for any of the younger guys that are listening to this, guys, pay attention, especially on like the athletic field and all these things. Like, how are you speaking to yourself? If you're saying things like I'm terrible at this, or I'm a failure, or I'm an idiot, or I can't believe that, we have to be careful with our language, because in that moment I realized it was the first time that I had talked about my action being
Mm-hmm.
stupid. What I did was stupid. What I did was idiotic. Instead of, in the past, the language that I would have used is, David, you're a beep, an
Yep.
idiot,
Yep.
right? That language was the default programming. And I didn't realize that that is something that is programmed into us from a very young age, whether we realize it or not, is that we're constantly attacking our identity, and we're constantly reinforcing an identity that is a failure, that's not a success, that is stupid, that's ugly, that's any of these types of things. If we're saying these things to ourselves on a regular basis, without getting super nerdy on everybody, we're literally telling our subconscious mind that's who we are. And when you live in that state, your emotions and your actions and your behaviors and your overall feeling of life is consistently affected, and you will constantly feel anxious, you'll constantly feel alone, you'll constantly feel isolated, you'll constantly feel like you don't fit in, you're not good enough, you're not worthy, that you don't have a right to be successful. You'll deal with imposter syndrome, and as you age, you're going to make life extremely much more difficult for yourself than if you would start to focus on shifting that self-talk. And so that's where our focus is right now, is with our kids, is helping them to learn it's okay to say, like what I did fail. Like, I failed
Mm-hmm.
at this. but I'm not a failure,
Yep.
right? What I did was silly or stupid or wrong or mean or whatever it is, but that's not who I am at my core. And so reinforcing that in our kids' lives, parents, especially for you, reinforcing that inside of yourself, uh, that is, I think, one of the most important things in our culture today, because we just see so many people that are just buried in shame, buried in shame. And it's all because of a poor identity.
Such an important piece for parents to understand. And if you're a young man listening to this, if you start now, you're way ahead of the game. This is something that I struggled with myself in my 40s, even trying to get a grasp on this. I appreciate the cognitive dissonance that you are allowing your children to go through when you juxtapose the difference between that was a mean thing, but you are not a mean person,
Yeah.
and then having them sit with that for a second and understand it, because what that'll do is when learning happens, when there's that cognitive dissonance, when there's the thing that you thought or you didn't know, and all of a sudden there's something new coming in and it's challenging whatever was going on there in your head. It's a powerful way to teach empathy to kids. The opposite or the inverse is also true when you think about praising your kids. I speak about this frequently, and it's the book Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck.
Mm.
And it's such a powerful thing for me as an educator, but also as a parent. And it's when you're praising children, you praise the process, you praise the effort, the hard work, the resiliency. You don't praise the product or the identity. So
Yes.
instead of you're the smartest kid, you're the best athlete, you're the number one fill in the blank here,
Mm-hmm.
talk about the hard work that you put in. The result of that was the home run, was the grade that you received on the paper. But you always go back to focusing in on the process, focusing in on the hard work, the things that they did to get to the point. Because if you're just like, you're the smartest kid because you got the 100, when they
Right.
get a 72 on the next test, now they're no longer the smartest kid because the smartest kid gets the 100 and they got a 72. Now they're an idiot and the negative self-talk starts. It's not an
Yes.
easy thing to do. And when I challenge parents to stop praising their kid's identity, I get pushback 100 times out of 100. But when I say, try this for a couple months, and if I'm wrong, come back and tell me that I'm wrong. And I will say, I made the mistake myself as a
Mm.
parent. So I have 3 kids, and the mistakes that I made with my son when he was growing up, I attempted to correct the mistakes with my daughters. I think I perfected it with the youngest one, but with my son, he was a football player, basketball player, baseball player. He's an excellent free throw shooter.
Yeah.
And so much so where when they would have a free throw competition in town, he won it. He would go whatever, 15 for 15. And they went to the county championship, and then he competed on a state level. Now imagine there's a kid who's like 9, 10 years old on the foul line in front of hundreds and hundreds of people, and all they're doing is shooting foul shots and foul shots and foul shots. And in his mind, he was a great foul shooter because he made every foul shot.
Mm.
Once he missed one, then he missed two, then he missed three, and now he's like, I suck. I'm not a good foul shooter anymore. Instead of, wow, you're working really hard. You spend a ton of time. The shots are going in because of the hard work. And if they don't, you could always work hard.
Yes. Yeah. I love that you said that, because uh, it's so critically important. And I think for even um, like my kids being a little bit younger, I'm doing that a lot with, they're in this phase where they like to create stuff. They'll
Mm-hmm.
draw things, they'll put things together. And one of the things my wife and I have really tried to do is that when our kids come and be like, mommy, daddy, look at this. Do you love it? Do you like it? Right. You know, it's like, is this awesome? The first question I ask now is, how do you feel about it, sweetheart? Like, how do you feel about it?
Yep.
I'm like, do you love it? Do you like it? Are you proud of the work that you put in? Because I think it's really, really important for us to build that self confidence in themselves. And I heard some, I can't remember who said it, but um, what ends up happening is that if we're constantly praising that result, just like you said, and we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly affirming it and affirming it and affirming it, what ends up happening is that we create kids that have a performance based mindset, and they think that love, and they think that connection, and they think that their purpose, and they think that their meaning and their value in life is directly tied to what they produce, not who they are intrinsically. And that shook me, because I realized that's how I grew up, is that, and why I still struggle to this day with a performance based mindset, is that if I can just give enough, if I can just do enough, if I can just win enough, if I can just serve enough, if I can just do enough, then I'll be accepted. And so trying to break that, I think, is critically important. And parents, there's a phrase that that I love that I attribute to former mentor of mine that I love dearly. His name's Cody Jefferson, and he says, "What we don't transform, we transmit." And if you don't
Mm,
transform this, like, and we know this as parents, is that we can, and Maya Angelou, one of her quotes as well is like, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. When I use these two things in tandem, what you don't transform, you transmit, with thinking about our kids are going to forget what we said. Our kids are going to forget what we did, but they will never forget how we made them
yep.
feel. And if we're not transforming these things in our own lives, we know this is that you can talk till you're blue in the face and discipline and put in boundaries and all these types of things. But if your life is not modeling the behavior that you want to see modeled inside of your children, they're going to become basically carbon copies of you.
Hmm.
And those problems and frustrations, I know this is heavy pressure for parents, but I think it's part of the responsibility we have as parents is recognizing that the greatest service we can do to our kids is to fix the ish in our lives and to work on ourselves harder than anything else. Because if we don't, we're just going to transmit all those problems to our kids. And it goes back to that old adage, Dennis, that we've all heard is like, do what I say, not what I do. And I'm like, that's BS.
Well,
Like,
yeah.
that doesn't work. You have to become that model and transform it in your life first. Otherwise, no matter how much you talk and how much you do and how much you train and how much you coach and how much you do these things, if it's not modeled in your life, you're going to transmit it and they're going to go through those same issues. And so that's what we're trying to do right now consistently and intentionally, is saying, okay, where can we get better? Where can we improve? Because we want our kids to look at us as healthy models, not just listen to what we have to say.
So much there. I love everything. And the lessons are caught and not taught, right? And so that's why I love asking the question around intentionality. Like, what are you doing intentionally right now to make sure that you're instilling these moral compasses for your kids, so to speak. And then you mentioned too, David, that like parenting is hard. Yeah, it's hard. It's really, really hard. And if you want to raise a successful leader in the future, it's hard right now. But here's the
Yeah.
thing, you have a really short amount of time with your kids. Unless you're intentionally doing it now, the time they get to 12 years old, like they're not listening to you anymore. So start now. Like if your kids are young, start now and have those conversations with them. And if you have to go through, it's a little bit more challenging and you have to sacrifice some of your own time. They weren't asking to be brought into this world. You made the decision. It was either conscious or unconscious. The decision was made, but the child is here. It's your responsibility to help raise a successful adult. And the
Yeah.
other thing is, as you're raising your kids, you're not just raising for you a 6, a 4, and a 2-year old, right? You're raising a 26, 24, 22-year old. And what are they going to be as young men and young women in the world in the future? So those are the things that you need to take account of as a parent. It's the short-term parenting or the long-term parenting. And the short-term parenting is you're in the grocery store and your kid is crying and all they want is the lollipop and they're going to make everyone else's life miserable around them. So at that moment, are you going to give in and buy them a lollipop just to shut them up? Are you going to be like, you know what? We're not getting a lollipop here. I'm not rewarding this behavior with a negative reinforcer by giving you the lollipop. And now that's harder to do in the moment. Absolutely. So are you going to give into it? Are you going to grab them like a potato sack and walk out of the grocery store? Are you going to deal with speaking to them and having other people judge the kid that's crying in the grocery store? That's like more of a long-term parenting. You're developing self-regulation for kids. You're helping them cope with an issue that they're dealing with. You're helping them deal with, listen, kid, you're not going to always get everything you want in life, and that's okay.
Right.
And just to close the loop really quickly, because I also appreciate what you said about if you are constantly praising your kid for whatever it is, what the damage that can do, or the damages that those types of parenting communications can have on kids. If you're constantly praising the identity and the result, it you're more likely to have a kid who will be manipulative in the future. They're more likely to be self-centered, where
Mm.
the everything else revolves around them. They're more likely to be a seeker of approval or like a people pleaser. in the
Yeah.
future if that's what we're doing. Is it harder to just praise the effort? Yes, it is, but I believe it's the right thing to do. And again, a mistake that I made with my son that I'm doing my best to change the trajectory not only for him but for my daughters. So what can you do in situations like that as a parent when they come up to you and they're like, look at this piece of artwork. Do you love it? Isn't this the best thing in the world? What I tell parents to do and I would tell educators to do as a principal, I would say in that moment, like think about it. What can you do to extend their love of it or push it back on them to give you their thought process? So if they give me the picture that they drew, isn't this the best thing you've ever seen? Do you love it? I would say, tell me about what was the inspiration for this?
Yeah.
Like why did you want to do this? Or like why did you choose to do these colors? Or if you could draw the next thing, where is the dinosaur going to go in the future? Or what was the most challenging thing that you did here? What's the next thing? I'm asking a question of the kid to extend their learning, but I'm doing it in an excited way. That is so much more powerful than daddy loves this. It's the best. You're the best artist in the world. Trust
Yeah.
me on this. If you could change anything with parenting, try this for a couple months and just see how it hits. I guarantee your kid will like whatever it is more than just the thumbs up, the smiley face, let's go out for a scoop of ice cream kind of thing.
Yeah, I want to add something too, real quick before we do close this loop that you mentioned, and this that I think is important is that there may be some parents, and that there's also probably some, some young men listening to this. You're like, okay, well, Dennis, you just said like at 12 it's over. Like, what happens? Like, what about those of us that are in our teenage years? Things like that. Parents, if you've got teenagers, you're in the throes of it. You're in probably the most challenging period of parenting. I will fully admit I have not lived through that yet, but I know enough from the mentors that I have to understand that it's probably one of the most challenging times in parenting because you've got a child who's becoming an adult. And in that process, I think it's even more critical for you to look at your habits, your patterns, your behaviors, your choices, and to do everything that's within your power to be modeling the change that you want to see in your own life. You have to lead yourself first. And for any of the young men that are listening to this, if you are in a situation where you're sincerely concerned about your parents, maybe they're listening to this, maybe they're not, and you're concerned about their health, you're concerned about their well-being, you're concerned about their mental health, you're concerned about their relationship, like, I want to encourage you to have the courage to lovingly have those conversations with your parents and to be honest with them. Because I recently had to have a conversation with my dad, and now I'm an adult. My dad's an adult, and I had to have a loving conversation with him about some concerns. And I told him, I said, Dad, I'm legitimately worried for your health, and I want you to know, like, I'm not here to try and manipulate you or control you or tell you how to live your life, but understand that it pains me to think about that in 10 to 20 years, we're not going to be able to do these things together that we always talked about doing because of the choices that you're making. And guys, that's really, really scary because especially when it's your parents, right? Because we feel like I don't have a right to talk to my parents about that stuff. But I think it's critically important because I'll tell you what, if my kids ever did that to me and said, hey, Dad, like they came to me and we're kind, respectful. I'm not saying go in guns a-blazing and attack them. But if my kids ever came to me and said those things, something like that around my health or my choices or me snoozing or not going to the gym or any of these types of things, right? That would actually inspire me and say, like, okay, I need to improve this area because someone loved me enough to tell me what I desperately needed to hear that I might not have wanted to hear. Right. And so I just, as a bit of encouragement for those that are listening, is that even if you're in your teenage years, young men, you have a responsibility to love your parents well. And parents, if you've got teenagers, understand that now is one of the most critical times for you to take self-inventory of your lifestyle and make the necessary changes. Just because you didn't do it when they were younger, there's that old quote, best time to plant a tree was 15 years ago, right? The second best time is today. So start today.
Yep. Totally agree with that. And to take it to another level as well, if you are a parent and you're doing something that you should not be doing as a parent, have those conversations with your kids. I don't think it's a bad thing to own that as well. So if you recognize you've been losing your temper with your kids, if you're not going to the gym, if you're throwing in the towel a little bit at work, whatever it is, kids need to hear the stories, especially from their dads, about the time that the shot didn't go in.
Yeah.
They need to hear the stories from their dads when they didn't take the cheerleader home after the championship game, right? They missed the layup. They walked the winning run in. They missed the assignment. They whatever it is, it's okay because here's the thing, their life is not going to be rainbows and roses all the time. The kids are going to struggle through things, and if they see you as their mentor and their role model, especially their father going through something challenging, and you're like, I went through this really sucked, I had a hard time with it, I made a couple poor decisions, even if it's in the recency, and here's what I'm going to do to get myself out of it. Here's how I climbed out of it in the past. This is what I'm planning to do. Watch me do it. So just in case you're in something like this in the future, that's really powerful. That's more powerful than the Al Bundy saying, well, Polk High won the state championship in 1968 because I was the best running back. And,
Yeah.
it's great to hear that, but I think kids need to hear the other stories as well. So I'm going to segue that into conversation about the ardent man, because in the ardent man, first I'd love for you to tell us what that is. I know it's an acronym that stands for something else, so talk to us a little bit about that. And then in that program, that brotherhood, you have dads in that brotherhood, right? There are men who are leading their families. They're struggling with things as well themselves. So talk to us a little bit about what it is, and then what are certain things that people are coming to within that program? Like, what are the commonalities of the things that the guys are struggling with right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Ardent Man, it is a community of men who are committed to becoming the best versions of themselves. And I know that sounds like a broad sweep, but our target is the 1% of the 1%. And what I mean by that is that if you look around, and we all know this, if we're honest with ourselves, none of us want to have mediocre lives, right? And there's a lot of people that are just leading mediocre, normal lives. And if that's something that is inside of your heart, you have to commit to a process of developing in each of what we call the 7 sectors of life. And so if you look at your health, you look at your relationships, you look at your function in business, you look at your skill sets, you look at your faith, there's a lot of different areas of our lives that many of us never actually take the time to assess, right? Regardless of what you believe, there's a lot of people that if we break things down into 3 simple buckets, health, wealth, and relationships, that people are just hyper focused on one of these, right? You may have someone that's got the body of a Greek god, but they can't put food on the table, or they have horrible relationships. Or you got, like, say, the perfect family man. He's got the best relationship in the world with his wife and his kids, but he's got the dad bod. He's got a beer gut. He's got, like, he doesn't have the energy, right? You look at these, if we simplify them down into these 3 buckets, the question is that are you intentionally becoming the version of you that you said you would be, that you want to be? If you were to go back and say, when I envision myself in the future, you ask the average guy, what does he want? He wants to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. We've heard this: healthy, wealthy, and wise. You have to get brutally honest with yourself about your health. You have to get really honest with yourself about your career and your wealth situation. And you have to get really honest with yourself about the wisdom that you're accumulating by the choices and decisions that you're making. And so for our guys, the Ardent Man, Ardent is an acronym. It stands for accountable, responsible, disciplined, empathetic, noble, and true. And what I have discovered over the years, Dennis, is that like most men, and I think it was Thoreau that said this, like, men lead lives of quiet desperation, is that there are millions and millions of men around the world that are completely isolated. They're stuck in addiction. They're stuck in vices. They're addicted to porn, addicted to alcohol, addicted to drugs, addicted to affirmation, addicted to work, addicted to performance. Like, addiction can show its faces in a lot of different ways. And what ends up happening is that we get stuck in these shame cycles because we don't know who we are and we don't know how to get out of it. You ask the average man, and I encourage anybody, just if you want to do a simple case study, go walk down the street and ask 5 people what they want in life. Most people cannot tell you what they want in life, or they'll give you some arbitrary answer like, I want $1 million. Right? That's what most people say. They're like, I want $1 million. But other than that, if you really look somebody in the eyeballs and you say, hey, what do you want in life? They can't tell you. But you know what they can tell you? They can tell you a list of about 1,000 things that they don't want. And what's really interesting is that we weren't taught as men to identify in our lives who we want to become in each area of our life. The leaders that we want to be, the fathers we want to be, the husbands we want to be. And so what we do inside of the Ardent Man is a very systematic approach to assessing. First and foremost, we got to look in the mirror. Like, we have to get really, really honest with where you are right now, which is an incredibly uncomfortable and revealing process. You basically feel naked. You feel like all of your hidden stuff is exposed. But that's the first step, is that you have to get to this place where you're like, okay, I'm going to let go of my ego and say, this is who I am. I'm just going to strip down and say, this is who I am. This is where I'm at in my relationships. This is where I'm at in my business. This is where I'm at in my health. Because if you don't, I use the example of a map. If I give you a map, Dennis, and I say, here's the buried treasure, right? This is where the buried treasure is. And I just give you the map. And all you see is this X that marks the spot. And you look at the map. The interesting thing is that that map is going to be completely and totally useless to you unless you know exactly where you are. If you know exactly where you are, then you can navigate to where you want to go. But that's the problem that so many of us have, is that we're looking at this blank map and saying, I want to get to this place. I want to be healthy. I want to be wealthy. I want to have a great relationship. I want to have, like, I want to be connected. I want to be loved. I want to be known. I want to be important, or whatever it is, right? Whatever definition you give to yourself for success. But we're not taking the time to assess where we are right now. And the reason this is critically important, especially for high achievers, is that many of us, having grown up in this performance-based mindset, is that we've been convinced, if I just do enough, I'll get there. If I can just do enough, work hard enough, make enough sales, get enough degrees, get enough certifications, have enough sex, have enough money, have enough whatever it is, then finally I'm going to feel okay about myself. And so what we do is we go through this process of stripping all of that away and saying, okay, here's exactly where you are. What is the one thing that you can start to focus intentionally on, and taking one step forward in the direction of becoming the man that you want to be? Because if we don't do that in a very systematic and intentional way, Dennis, what we do is we watch a motivational video on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and we say, I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. tomorrow and I'm going to do an ice cold plunge and I'm going to run 17 miles and I'm going to sit down and journal and meditate and I'm going to, like, and you might do that for all of like 2.5 days. And you're like, I don't know if I'm right. And it's because we place these unrealistic expectations on ourselves. And it's not that we can't attain to those in time and we can't consistently elevate our standards. Is that if you were to look at someone that is learning how to ride a tricycle and say, hey, let me put you on this, Harley 900, that ain't going to happen. It doesn't mean you can't grow into that. It doesn't mean that you can't get there. But you take a little kid who's learning how to ride his bicycle and put him on a motorcycle with a lot of power that can go really fast. It's very, very dangerous. And so what we do inside of the Ardent Man is that we create an environment where there's that place to have that transparent vulnerability. Here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm dealing with. Here's what's going on. And then we have accountability and discipline and structure built in for consistency of habits, making sure that there's actual real transparent accountability of saying, I need someone to not only hold me accountable, but I want to be inspired. That's what I think a lot of guys are missing as well. As you look around at the average guy's friend circle, and there's nothing inspiring about it, right? It's we kick it back on Friday night, have some beers, play some poker, do some stuff, right? Whatever. And just, get through the weekend. And then, oh God, here comes Monday again. And that's the average existence of the average man in the United States of America. And so the problems that you asked about, the problems that these guys are facing, is that they're fairly common. It's just feeling like they're, that life is mediocre or bland. They're successful. And that's what's hard. As many of these guys are very, very successful in their own right, but they still feel unfulfilled. They don't feel like they're living a life of purpose. They still feel like there's a sense of like question and lacking clarity, of wondering why the fulfillment isn't there, even though they've hit the benchmarks and they've been successful in certain areas. And a lot of it ties to this identity that has been programmed into them for years and years and years and years. And so what we do is we go through a systematic process of reworking and recreating, rediscovering who that man really wants to be, and then aligning his actions, his behaviors, his values, his virtues, and saying, okay, here's what we can do to systematically bring about change. And what's been incredible, Dennis, is like we've seen addictions broken, we've seen marriages healed, we've seen guys who've completely gotten off medication, we've seen guys who are like last I checked, one of the guys, he's lost like 30 pounds in like
Wow.
3 months, which has been which is insane, by the way. But he's not doing any crazy diet. He's still eating normally, right? Like healthy food. He's just changed everything. He's walking every day. He's going to the gym consistently. Like these little tiny changes. What we're doing is we're trying to help men to go back to that place where they lost themselves and rediscover who they really are so that they can become the husbands, fathers, and leaders that they want to be, and to be an inspiration in their community, to feel confident when they look in the mirror. And I think that's the biggest thing. Most of the guys I talk to, when I ask them, like, how do you feel about the man in the mirror? Their eyes don't light up. They really don't like that man in the mirror for any number of reasons. And it could be their health, it could be their job situation, it could be their marriage. But what we do is helping men to get to a point where they can look themselves in the mirror and literally smile and say, that man is my best friend now, and I'm proud of him. And that's really hard for a lot of men to say.
So many things that you mentioned right there resonated with me. I'll start with the last one first, the man in the mirror. While it is a Michael Jackson song, it's also one of the poems that I use in building men. And there is a poem called The Man in the Glass, and it has 5 stanzas to it. And the last one ends with, "You may fool the whole world down the pathway of years and get pats on the back as you pass, but your final reward will be heartache and tears if you've cheated the man in the glass."
Mm,
And the other thing that you mentioned, David, was living a mediocre life and challenging men with that question. That when you said that to me, it resonated so deeply. And I reflected back on my experience as an educator, as a principal, and from the outside, it looked a certain way. You know, the white picket fence thing, like you mentioned, the corner office, the car, the this, the that, like you think you have it, but you're like it was mediocre. It wasn't the best that I can do. It's scary to get to that point where you have to challenge those fears in front of you. And it made me think of lyrics from a song, or it's actually a poem by Zach Bryan, the country guy,
mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
it's called Fear and Fridays. And the last line of the song or the poem or whatever is, I think Fear and Fridays got an awful lot in common. They're overdone and glorified, and they always leave you wanting. And that's how he
Mm,
ends the song.
wow.
And what you mentioned about kicking back on Friday nights, it's something that I talked to my son about. When you mentioned being intentional, one of the things that I'm intentional about right now as I'm raising my own kids is thinking and talking to them about the chapters in our lives, right? Like you only get a finite amount of time in this chapter in your life. So I said to my son before this year in school, I was like, your freshman year is going to be a journey. Like this will be a chapter. Next year will be very, very different. This is your first year away from home. You have to manage your life. You have to, I'm not there to call me anytime you want, but you're going to have to manage the difficult situations and balance the studying and the partying and all the stuff that comes along with being a freshman in college. But recognize that this is a chapter in your life and it will be over. So appreciate the moments that you're walking to class in the rain and be like, you know what? I appreciate that I'm able to walk, right? Like you appreciate those things in the moments. And
Yeah.
the last thing that I thought as you were talking, there were so many things there, but there's a quote by Benjamin Franklin and it goes, some people die at 25 but aren't buried until 75.
Mm,
And it connects back to that whole thing of living with intentionality. Like don't settle for mediocrity in
yeah.
your life, which I know for a fact you are not doing. You are getting the most out of this experience on this planet. Last 2 questions before I let you go, and after you find out the gender of your baby, you got to let me know.
Well,
Once that becomes a reality and in your world. um Second to last question is, guys that are listening right now, like they're I always get the questions about, okay, what are things that I can be doing on a regular basis? So you mentioned the cold plunge and the this and then that. If you were going to suggest to a young man a habit that they can start incorporating into their daily or weekly routines, what's something that they should be thinking about incorporating right now?
mm. So inside of our brotherhood, we have this morning routine, which is called 6 and 12. And it's 6 small exercises in the scope of 12 minutes. What I have found is really, really interesting that within this, there's one thing in particular that is probably the most impactful of any habit that you can do. And it is 2 minutes, just 2 minutes. Everyone has 2 minutes. If you don't have 2 minutes,
Right.
two
Email me.
minutes,
Tell me. I will
right?
find 2 minutes in your day.
It's 2 minutes of what we call immersive gratitude. Now, immersive gratitude is different than what most people talk about when they talk about gratitude, because like even appreciation was, we can go throughout our day and appreciate our coffee and appreciate our family and say, well, I'm grateful for my wife or my kids or my boss or my teacher, my friends, whatever. Immersive gratitude is very, very different. Immersive gratitude is where it's almost a meditative experience where you sit and you close your eyes and you just focus on one, two, or three very, very simple things. And you don't just express outwardly gratitude for it, you allow yourself to feel on the deepest level. You engage your entire being with actual gratitude for that thing, because there's a difference. There's a difference in just saying, oh yeah, I'm grateful for my mom, and sitting for 2 minutes and thinking about all of the reasons that you are grateful for your mother, and allowing those feelings and those emotions to overtake you in a really powerful way. Because what this does is it changes our physiological state. It reduces our cortisol. It causes our stress levels to go down, and it's a part of what we would effectively, for anyone that's familiar with Tony Robbins, it's a useful part of priming yourself for the day. And so, if I had to pick one thing that I would encourage any young man to do, is take 2 minutes and just shut up, sit down, and think about what you can be truly grateful for. And it doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be your pillow. It can be your mom. It can be your best friend. It can be a pencil. It can be Dennis Meralda. It can be anything that you just sit there for 2 minutes and you immerse yourself fully into gratitude for that. It will absolutely change your life.
I am grateful for you, David Waldy. I will immerse myself in that feeling once we get off this podcast here today.
Grateful for you
You
too.
really, I mean, you really answered. It was a 2-for-1 there, because my last question was, it typically is, if someone's listening and they could do just one thing and that one thing will change their life, what's that one thing? You included a habit and the one thing together. So that, I mean, it's a powerful thing.
Let me add one thing to
Yeah,
that.
go ahead. I would love that.
But this isn't something that you would necessarily do on a consistent basis, but it is a one-time exercise that, well, I say one time. You're going to want to do this exercise, and it's something that I recommend revisiting almost like either on a monthly or a quarterly basis. And it has to do with this question of like, there's probably a lot of people that have listened to this and be like, okay, David, you guys have talked before, and I heard this in the last podcast about who I want to become and who I want to be, but I don't know. I don't know who I want to be. I don't know what I want to do with my life. I don't know what in the world I'm here for, what my calling is, or my purpose, or any of that kind of stuff. So there's two parts here. Number one, real quick, if I can add this, Dennis, is that purpose, and give a very clear, succinct, hopefully the best definition of purpose anyone's ever heard in their entire life. Purpose, if we talk about it in any context, purpose is an action to be taken to create a specific result. And so, Dennis, let me ask you a question. What is the purpose of you taking a shower?
To get clean.
What is the purpose of you eating food?
To nourish and give me energy.
What is the purpose of sleeping?
To regenerate, rest, have my cells be prepared for tomorrow.
So every single thing that we do, whether we're conscious of it or not, we are taking an action to create a specific result. And we overcomplicate this in our life. And for everyone listening, I want you to grab a hold of this. If you want more purpose and meaning and fulfillment, and you want to feel like you're on fire, passionate about life, living with purpose, full of purpose, on purpose, by a purpose, with a purpose, if you want purpose, understand the first thing you have to do is to define the result that you want. If you want to be clean, take a shower. That's the purpose. The purpose of the shower is so that you're clean. It's the same thing in life, and we overcomplicate this. If you can define the results that you want in your health, the results that you want in your relationships, the results that you want in your career or in your finances or in any area of your life, if you can define it and say, this is what I want, then what will happen is you will start to see clearly what needs to happen in order for you to get that result. And then everything you're going to do will be in alignment. This is a buzzword, alignment with what result you want to create. And that means that you now are doing things on purpose, or in another word, one of our favorites, Dennis, is intentionally. Mm-hmm. You're now living intentionally. And so that's just a quick preface to this exercise. Again, one time, and then if you want to revisit this on a monthly or quarterly basis, on the left, I want you 2 sheets of paper. On the left sheet of paper, you're going to write down every single thing that you're dissatisfied with in your life. Everything. Be as petty as you want to be. Like literally write down everything you're dissatisfied with in your life. And then on the right-hand piece of paper, what you're going to do is you're going to start with number 1. And over on the right-hand side, you're going to write one of 2 things. You're either going to write what you do want instead. And if you don't know what you want instead, all you need to do is write the exact opposite. So if you write on the left-hand side of the page, like, I'm dissatisfied with my health, right? I hate that I'm overweight, or I hate that I'm constantly snoozing, or I don't like the fact that da, 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 da. If you can write down everything that you're dissatisfied with in your life on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, you can start to write out what you want. And again, this is hard because sometimes a lot of people don't know what they want. If you can't identify what you want instead, just write the opposite of what you have on the left-hand side of the page. Once you've made that entire list, you will now have enough information to know what needs to change systematically in your life to create the results that you're wanting to create. Until you start to do this, I have found pretty consistently, Dennis, that most people cannot and will not be able to define who they want to become until they give themselves permission to define what they want in life. Because once you start to define what you want in life, it will help you create the picture of who you need to become to get it. And that's the key. We always are asking, what do I need to do to fix my marriage? What do I need to do to fix my health? What do I need to do to fix my finances? Great questions, just not the best first question, in my opinion. The first question is, who do I need to become? And the way to figure out who you need to become, who you want to become, is getting clear on everything you're dissatisfied with, and then writing out the opposite, or what you do want, and then start taking small daily action towards that. And I guarantee you do that with consistency, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, you will look back and you won't be able to recognize yourself. You will literally become a different person, and you will start to get that clarity of like, oh my gosh, I know who I want to become now. I have alignment, I have clarity, I have purpose, I have vision. I know who I want to become. And it is one of the most freeing, beautiful things that you can ever experience. And so if you do that exercise once and then you want to revisit it on a periodic basis, that, in addition to the gratitude, change your life.
Powerful. I haven't heard that in the 218 episodes in. That's the first time I was given that piece of advice. I absolutely love it. It reminds me of a Seinfeld episode where George, he's talking to Elaine and everything is going wrong in his life. He goes up to the waitress and he's like, I've always ordered tuna on toast and nothing's ever worked out for me with tuna on toast. He goes, I want the complete opposite. I want chicken salad on rye, untoasted, and a cup of tea. And everything changes when he starts doing the opposite, because it never worked for him in the past. It's a great episode. So on that note, David, thank you, my friend. I really, really appreciate you. Tell us where we can find you. How do we get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can, at the risk of sounding pretentious, you can Google me.
Yeah,
you can just Google me. If you're a man who's looking for brotherhood, if you're looking for community, accountability, you're wanting to take your life to the next level in your habits and your disciplines, go to theardentman.com. You can check that out there. But otherwise, if you want to actually connect one-to-one, hit me up on Instagram. Just reference Dennis, and any friend of Dennis is a friend of mine. And yeah, I love creating actual conversations. Even if what I offer isn't a great fit for you, I love pointing people in direction of books, resources, making connections. I believe in being a connector. And I'll end with this, is that I think one of the most powerful definitions of winning that I've ever heard is it's less of a definition, but it's more so of around fulfillment and success, is that life's not a zero-sum game. Is that for you to win doesn't mean anybody else has to lose, but it's better when you can win with people beside you. And so finding those people, plugging in with men like Dennis, guys, young guys, if you're listening to this, get into the building, men. Like, for real, you've been listening to this podcast for you came across this, right? Just have a conversation with Dennis. This man loves deeply, and he'll give you the steps you need in order to become the man that you want to be. And that's why I think we're so aligned, Dennis, is because we're very similar mission, kind of different lanes, but we are together. We are in the process of rebuilding what we've lost, I think, in much of society. And so I honor you and thank you for having me today, brother.
Oh, you got it. Much love, my man. Really, really appreciate you. If you made it this far into the episode, please consider rating this, reviewing it. More than anything, share this out with anyone that you think might get value from the message. Go one step further than you thought you could go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.